That's it, right there. MacReady has to be the thing. Or not.
Is MacReady a creature or not?
But Childs, on the other hand, definitely has to be the thing. I mean, just look. But then again...
I still can't decide whether Childs was a creature or not.
Maybe they're both the thing? Or not.
You couldn't ever possibly figure out.
I mean, who really knows, other than John Carpenter?
I guess you could call it an ambiguous ending.
Me. I know. Because I have spent the last couple months looking at every single scene, every single behind-the-scene detail, rewatching the commentary on this movie.
We talked about the ending of the movies for the whole movie.
And also listening so much to it that little minor sounds have made a difference and an impact on how I'm viewing the movie. And no, I'm not crazy, because I can go through, explain it all, and help you to also understand the conclusion that I've come to about who is what at the end of the thing. So obviously there are 4 different possibilities for what actually happened at the end of the thing. 1 is that they were both human. 2 is that Childs is actually the thing and Mac is human. 3 is that Mac is the thing and Childs is still human. And 4 is that they are both now the thing. And so if you haven't seen this movie, well, honestly, I don't know why you're here watching this long of a video on a movie you haven't seen.
Most of you don't know what's going on around here.
So, spoilers, I guess. And for the rest of us that absolutely love this movie, I'm sure you already know which possibility you believe is true. And what I want you to do is either throw that in the comments or throw it out the window, because we're going to take our time, walk through each individual scene, look at the commentaries, the script, and the behind the scenes to figure out exactly what happened, how the thing operates, and come to the conclusion of what actually happened in the end together. And I'm pointing it out now because I'm not talking about the video game that came out in 2002, and I'm not talking about the prequel that came out in 2011, because as far as I can find, those are the only 2 things that people actually consider canon in the Thing universe, and that's still heavily debated. But my biggest issue is that it was 20 years and 29 years before either of those things came out. Because I'm telling you, there is more than enough information with things that are directly connected to the movie itself that we can get a confident answer and finally explain what happened at the end of the thing. And so to start us off... Hello? To start us off, we have a word from our sponsor. Aura, because while you might not have to worry about an alien showing up and taking over your body, you do need to be worried about hackers trying to take over your identity. And no lie, here about a week and a half ago, somebody did leak my social security number out on the dark web, and I'm not happy about that. And the only reason that I even know about it is because of Aura, since they alert me anytime that my phone number, my email, my social security number, any of my personal information that is leaked onto the dark web or gets picked up anywhere on the internet, they let me know so that way we can handle it together. And not only that, what's really amazing to me is they also have a whole system that helps to keep up with all of my banking information, as well as a system that helps to keep up with my credit to let me know if there's any suspicious activity going on. Aura's become this all-in-one app to help keep me protected from the internet and everything that goes on behind the scenes, but also with their built-in VPN service, it helps to keep me protected while I'm on the internet. And I'm so excited because they updated their VPN to where you can change your location to over 85 different countries. And it's all thanks to Aura, which you can try out for 14 days free with my link down in the description. Aura.com/poltergeist, where you'll be able to see if any of your personal information has been leaked out there on the internet and give their VPN a try. Let me know what horror movies you find all across the world. And thank you so much for watching the ad. It helps way more than what you will ever know whenever you guys check out my sponsors. And with all of that, let's get back to the video. So in the opening shot of the film, we see an alien spaceship flying through space whenever it enters into Earth's atmosphere and actually lands down at Antarctica. Now, whether or not it crash lands or not, we're not exactly sure, but if you're asking me what happened, is that whatever was actually flying this ship was dealing with the same problem that our crew of 12 over at Outpost 31 is fixing to deal with for the rest of this movie.
You can look at this and you can see some of what other planets it's been to, what was there, what was on those planets, what did it run into that it had to imitate.
And it's imitated every life form it's been, encountered.
And I say that mainly because if this thing did decide to fly down and land at Antarctica, it would easily be able to look around and go, not much here, get up and then fly to a different continent on Earth, but instead it stays where it's at. It then is the only thing that gets out of the ship and then freezes until they're found by the Norwegians. So to me, everything about this thing points to it being an intruder not just on Earth, but also on the ship. But what we actually need to worry about now in 1982 is this helicopter that is currently chasing this husky through the snow. And at first it seems like this could just be a really intense way of trying to get their dog that escaped back, but then we see the dog is absolutely running for its life. And somehow, from who knows exactly how far away, this dog is able to navigate from the Norwegian base all the way to the American base at Outpost 31. And I'm going to point it out here, as well as many times from this point on, this thing is really, really smart. Even as the dog, it would be able to look up at one of the maps across the base and figure out which direction that it needs to go to make it to another base to start this whole process over again. Because our 12-man research crew at the United States National Science Institute Station 4 is only preparing for winter right now and is not worried about the Norwegians or what their dogs are currently doing. Because while the dog is currently evading bullets, we have one crew member who is currently working on the plow outside. We're not sure exactly who this is. We have 6 crew members that are in the rec room, which are Palmer, Blair, Windows, Gary, Copper, and Fuchs. And we have one other member that we actually see before everything goes south. Get it? Because they're currently in Antarctica. Who is sitting in his room by himself, drinking a bottle of J&B and playing chess on his fancy chess wizard here. And it's little things like this scene that made this video take a lot longer than it should have, because this game of chess makes absolutely no sense. Because MacReady, who's the white pieces, he's able to move a piece that he literally doesn't have. And after he successfully does this, he then makes the comment,
Poor baby, you're starting to lose it, aren't you?
but then whenever we see the board again, it's a completely different setup, and there's no way that it could have got to this point with just one move. But with the setup that the computer now has, it would simply be able to move its queen from bishop 3 to rook 5, and then it would be able to actually win the game. But instead, what we hear is,
My move, rook to knight 6. Checkmate.
which means that it moved one of its rooks one space and then literally called it a win. Even though it's most definitely not a checkmate in any form or fashion, it still called it a win and ended the game early. And this is the reason that Mac reacts the way that he does by pouring his drink into the chess wizard, completely blowing it up, because not only was the computer not fair in declaring its win whenever it didn't, but the entire system itself was broken from the very beginning. And yes, I did have to learn descriptive notation for chess to be able to understand and explain everything that just happened in this one little scene, but I'm sure that you can understand where I'm coming from, because what happens here is extremely important for understanding what happens at the end. Or at least, I hope you agree. Luckily though, it seems like it was really good timing for Mac to do this, because this is whenever the Norwegian helicopter has finally made it up to the American base. As we see that our crew is trying to figure out exactly what's going on, this dog is still just running for its life. And then we have these 2 Norwegians that are currently getting out of the helicopter, trying their hardest to stop this dog from making it to the base. So hard, in fact, that one of them pulls a pin on a grenade, accidentally throws it backwards, and then runs over trying to find it in the snow. Not only does it blow him up, but it also, of course, blows up the helicopter. But we should have noticed how serious of a situation this was whenever the other Norwegian guy is still just running after the dog, not even focused on what just happened with, presumably, his friend, because he continues to shoot after this dog and runs up yelling in Norwegian. Which, if you don't speak Norwegian, what he said is that is not a dog. It's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog. It isn't real. Get away, you idiots. Which clearly nobody here understands what he's saying, because if anybody did, they would have been yelling at Bennings, telling him to not let that dog lick him all over his hands and face. Which, think about it, this is a really weird reaction from a dog that has currently been running for its life after being shot at multiple times and having grenades thrown at it, right? Because a normal dog probably would have just continued running with its tail between its legs to find shelter or find safety, and not just stop at the first person that it comes to happily lick them all over their face and all over their hands. But as we know now from what the Norwegian just told us, this isn't a dog, this is some sort of thing. And the best way that it will ensure that it survives is to pass on its DNA to the next closest person. Sure enough, that's exactly what it's trying to do here. So Mr. Norway here realizes that he doesn't have any other options and has to take out this thing at any cost that he can. Sadly though, whenever he shoots, he only hits it in the leg and also hits Bennings in the leg. This causes the dog to take off, for everybody to jump to the side because clearly this guy's got to be crazy, and for Gary, who is currently standing inside, to actually pull out his revolver and use it on this insane Norwegian man. So now that the threat has been dealt with, we have MacReady getting up, running over to check on Bennings, giving him his bottle of J&B, and then they're all headed over to deal with the fire at the helicopter. And I'm just going to point out, because it will come back up later, Bennings grabs the bottle with the same hand that the dog also licked, and then decides to take a drink exactly where the dog also decided it needed to lick. So while Bennings is getting him a drink, some of the crew's dealing with the fire at the helicopter, we have Clark coming out to actually take care of and to see what all is going on with the dog. And if you look closely, you can actually see that the dog has a wound from the gunshot on its back left leg. Does it really mean anything? Probably not. I just thought it was a cool little detail, because it's not like we see Copper sewing up the dog just like he is Bennings here. And even if we did, I doubt that the dog would complain near as much as what Bennings does.
Oh, come on.
And somebody else who also has to constantly complain about what all is going on in their lives is Windows here, who is trying his hardest to call literally anybody to let them know what just happened. But he's not able to get a hold of anybody, and he tries to tell Blair this, and Blair just tells him,
Get a hold of somebody. Get a hold of anybody. We gotta report this mess.
and then they continue to argue back and forth because, of course, that's not how this works.
I doubt if anybody's talked to anybody on this entire continent.
And this is whenever Knowles comes in to talk to Palmer, Norris, Childs, Copper, Bennings, Fuchs, and Gary about what all just happened. And listen, I know that there is a lot of names that I am currently spouting off, and if you haven't seen the movie in a while, you're probably like, who are all of these people? Whenever I was watching the movie for the first couple times to make this video, I was having trouble just keeping up with who is who and exactly what names matched where, but now, of course, I've got them all down. Is that a calculator button? No way. That's handy. Stupid. But I can tell you the two biggest things that helped me most were this picture, which just has all of them actually labeled on exactly who they are, and you can just try to commit it to memory. But there's also something at the very beginning of the script that actually describes each one of the characters, so that way it can shine some light on who they are as well as how they act.
In the winter of 1982, these men were commissioned by the United States National Science Foundation to gather data concerning the physical and natural sciences on the continent of Antarctica. MacReady, 35, helicopter pilot. Likes chess. Hates the cold. The pay is good. Gary, 46, station manager. Stiff. Ex-Army officer. Wears a handgun. Childs, 33, 6'4", 250. Black. A mechanic. Can be jolly, but don't mess. Blair, 50, senior biologist. Edgy, inquisitive, overworked. Fuchs, 25, sensitive, intelligent, unassuming, an assistant biologist. Dr. Copper, 45, professional, a decent man, a good doctor. Palmer, 35, second string chopper pilot, crack mechanic, slight 60s acid damage. Knowles, 22, the cook, bright, black, irreverent, but kind-hearted, roller skates. Norris, 44, stocky, rugged-looking, a geophysicist, an incipient heart condition. Bennings, 38, a meteorologist, dutiful, an old pro. Clark, 24, the dog handler, likes it here, good at his job. Sanchez, 21, the radio operator, hates it here, lousy at his job.
So thanks to Crowmudgeon for his help. I'm hoping that everybody will now be on the same page, that whenever they see this guy, that they're not thinking, well, that's just random crew member number 5, but you'll actually be able to know that this is the good doctor, Dr. Copper. So he goes to get MacReady, or Mac, so that way he can have a pilot to fly over to the Norwegian base, and while they're leaving, we actually see that the dog is currently hanging out underneath the ping pong table. And this is whenever we jump forward a couple hours, and the only person that we see that is actually up and around at this time is Knowles, who is in the kitchen because, of course, he's the cook. But the thing is, he's playing his music really loudly, and this makes Bennings mad, who, once more, decides to complain to everybody about it.
I'm trying to get some sleep. I was shot today.
So Knowles, of course, hears him out and does exactly what you would expect him to do. Because, I mean, do you want your food to taste good or not, Bennings? I mean, you got to pick one or the other. And it's just after this interaction that we get a slow pan around different rooms in the base and see that nobody's up and around, but it's interesting because it's as though we're slowly stalking through each room, just as the dog is currently doing from this room down the hallway, checking in on Bennings' room before it decides to continue over to somebody's bedroom. Who is this? Well, if we look and we compare all of the different silhouettes of every single person that is actually there at the crew, it could either be Windows because of the hair, it could be Norris, or it could be Palmer. Problem is, in reality, it's actually the stuntman Dick Warlock. Because of course, Carpenter had to keep it as ambiguous as possible so that way nobody would really know who's in here. So just keep it in mind that as we move forward from here, that either Norris or Palmer were assimilated right here whenever the dog entered the room. So have you got that? Okay, good, because everything's fixing to get a whole lot weirder whenever Mac and Copper show up over at the Norwegian base to find that basically everything is either frozen or burnt down. And as they enter the base, they're trying to figure out what on earth happened here. There's an axe just buried into the door for who knows what reason. We've also got giant holes that have been blown into the side of the base by probably explosions. And it's very clear that every single person that was there is no longer alive. And it's not like they just died of natural causes or even froze to death, because whenever Copper finds this guy over in the comm room, while he is frozen, that's clearly not what unalived him. And I'll be honest, I don't know how much of this I can actually show, but I can tell you that from listening to the commentary with John Carpenter, they were really worried about how this was actually going to look whenever they were filming it, because they kept filming it and they were like, that looks dumb. That's not going to look right.
But when we all saw this on the set, we thought, oh, Lord, this is not going to work.
But Rob Bottin and his crew just kept telling everybody, just trust me. I know what I'm doing. It's going to look fine. We just need to spray a little bit more of this stuff on it, and it's going to look great. Just trust me, John. And sure enough, I think it looks awesome, especially because this is one of the first crazy things that we get to see in the movie. And as you know, everything else just gets so much better from here.
Come on, Doc.
Which is just a testament to always trust the process, and everything will come out so much better than what you expected. So after this, Mac and Copper decide to continue their exploration of the entire base, where they actually find something that seems to be like a big block of ice in the garage that has also been like hollowed out for whatever reason. But it's not until they walk back outside to see where a big pile has been burned that they find what was actually in that block of ice. And just whatever this thing was, they're not sure if it's man in there or if it's beast of some kind. So for whatever reason, they decide the smartest thing to do would be to bring it back to their own base.
Help me find a shovel, Doc.
So that way they can then have an autopsy and figure out just what it is. So upon their arrival back at Outpost 31, we see a few of the crew members coming out to help them with whatever in the world and ask questions, I'm sure. But we also see the dog watching them from the window, because it knows that everything's fixing to get a lot more intense, because everything that they just saw, they're fixing to tell everybody, but there's no telling how excited it was whenever it saw this thing. I mean, just look how happy he is, right? Like he's got, I guess he's happy. And he would probably be the only one that is happy to see it, because everybody else's reaction speaks for itself. Then of course the guy who is currently struggling most with the reveal of this thing is the one that has to actually do the autopsy on it.
Blair, I'd like you to start an autopsy right away.
And it's just so funny learning that all of these guys are giving a genuine reaction to this thing, because that little smoke that you see coming off of this thing is apparently really smelly, and Blair was close enough that he was struggling and got a big whiff right at the beginning and continued to basically cough and try to cover his mouth from here on, just like what Gary did towards the end here. But it works well because it plays into, oh no, what are we gonna do? This is crazy. And what also must have been crazy is the Norwegian guy, because as Copper finds out,
Nothing wrong with this Norwegian. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing.
and what adds even more to all of this craziness is whenever Blair is doing the autopsy, he's calling off all the organs that he's finding, and then he tells Fuchs and Copper,
Seem to be normal.
then you know we got to get another shot of this incredible creation here. I got this whole space right over here. It would be perfect to have like one of those things coming out of the wall. That would be awesome, because right now, I guess the only stuff, the thing that I actually have is my poster back there. And then I've, of course, got the 3 movie set. And does this count? Technically, The Thing. Dumb. Trying to make jokes. Dumb. Get back to the movie boy. So that night we have Palmer and Child sitting in a bedroom as they're watching TV together, and they're showing a smoke back and forth. And then over in the rec room we have a few of the crew members playing pool, and the only thing I can assume is that this pool table also converts into a ping pong table, which is awesome. And then we have a few of the crew members who are currently playing cards, and one of them happens to be Bennings, who realizes that the dog is under the table and it scares him, and he yells for Clark to get the dog out of here and go put it up in the kennel where it belongs. So Clark, he takes the dog down to the kennel to actually put it with the other sled dogs that they have.
Go ahead.
And I just love this scene and actually hearing all of the background information about the dog itself, because his name is Jed, and apparently he was one of the best animals to ever work with, because you can just tell from whenever Jed is actually walking in, the way that he's taking the one step at a time, and then he still looks so rigid whenever he lays down next to all the other dogs, because all the other dogs just look like they're chilling like regular old dogs, and Jed clearly looks like an imposter. And Clark even notices that, well, that's kind of weird, but, you know, he's like, new dog, sure, whatever. And him being the dog man, he decides to leave Jed in there and goes about his business. But Jed is just an actor, and this thing that is currently in here is called out pretty quick by all the other dogs. And to connect more with them, the thing decides to open up. And it doesn't take any time at all for Stanley Uris here to come running back down to see what in the world's going on. And Yes, I do plan to cover all of the It movies, so don't even worry about it. What you should be worried about right now is exactly what Mac has also been worried about, and the reason that he walks into the kitchen, gets a bottle for himself, and then pulls the fire alarm to let everybody know chaos is going on, and he could feel it in his bones. And speaking of bones, it makes me wonder, does this thing have bones? Because the way that it's moving makes me think it doesn't. And what we can figure out from this whole thing is that it is able to basically conjure up the past things that it has assimilated up to this point.
And it's imitated every life form it's been, encountered. So who knows? I mean, that it becomes a crab worm dog with its head split open. It's pretty bizarre.
And as Blair will point out later, that could be millions and millions of other species that it just has access to. Which is why they need to put an end to it right now. And so Mac and Gary pull out both of their guns that they have and begin blasting at this thing. Problem is, Mac also recognizes that, hey, we probably need to go ahead and take care of the rest of the dogs so that way this doesn't turn into like a weird dog thing colony going on back here. Starts to blast them whenever, of course, Clark... Because all Clark wants to do is take care of his dogs the best that he can because he absolutely loves these little guys and not have them all get shot or roasted by either Mac or Childs. But the real problem is not that all of this just happened in front of everybody to where they're now all going to have to admit something wild is going on here. But it's the fact that this thing split in two before Childs even made it down there with the flamethrower. This thing split in two, jumped up in the attic, took off probably halfway across the base before the big gross looking thing on the ground was ever caught on fire. Which, hey, if you're keeping count, that means that either Norris or Palmer are already one of the things, and now we have a second one that is currently running across the attic. And sure enough, probably will find a way to take somebody over later on in the film. And I will say that some people think that it actually falls back down to the ground after Childs comes in and burns this one, but the time difference, and this thing is trying its hardest to survive and get away, I just don't see how anyway it just sort of sat up there and waited to be caught on fire. It knows what's fixing to happen. It's not dumb. That's one thing that needs to be established with this entire movie, is that the thing is extremely smart. And Blair seems to be the only one at the base that is starting to understand this as he does an autopsy on this weird dog thing, and what's left of it anyway. And then begins to reveal the secrets of how this alien creature works and what it's trying to do.
It's an organism that imitates other life forms, and it imitates them perfectly.
And I just love it because Blair doesn't stop here, but he continues his research for as long as he can, with his next step actually going to take a blood sample from the surviving dog that jump scared Clark earlier.
That's not dog. It's imitation.
And this is when the paranoia amongst the crew members starts, because Blair wants to know, how long was this dog out for?
I don't know. It's just wandering around camp all day.
And Blair's thinking the same thing that I am, because why in the world would the guy whose literal job it is to take care of the dogs, to put them in the kennel, and to make sure he knows exactly where they are at all times, not be doing his job? Because once more, even in the script, it says that he is good at his job. So this causes Blair's suspicions of Clark to rise even more, and he has to ask him,
How long were you alone with that dog?
To which Clark answers,
I don't know, an hour and a half maybe.
And right after this, it starts to sink in for Clark exactly what Blair is getting at whenever he begins to question Blair. And Blair just says,
I don't know, it's probably nothing.
And since Blair doesn't know what we know and hasn't seen what we've seen, what we need to do is keep up and remember that it's either Norris or Palmer that is already assimilated. We have the other half of the dog thing that got away in the attic. And now we also potentially have Clark as being another thing here at the base. mean, that's 3 and we really haven't even gotten started. So now that everybody is aware that something crazy is going on, the team gets together in the rec room and they're trying to figure out what's going on with the Norwegians. And they watch a videotape that they took from the base earlier to see sort of what they were actually studying out there in the Antarctica.
Jeez.
And they figure out just a little bit that they were basically using thermite to sort of dislodge something from the ice so that way they could then study it a little better. And fun fact, one of these guys actually in the videotape is John Carpenter himself as a sort of cameo.
I'm there someplace in that videotape.
Okay,
But the funniest part to me is in the commentary, he's also not sure which one of them is him. He just knows that one of these guys is him, and Norris knows that where they were actually doing their research is roughly in this area.
Here.
And that's all that Mac needs to fly out there and see what in the world's going on. So MacReady flies with Palmer, Norris, and his giant hat over to where the Norwegians were working to see exactly what they were trying to find in the ice. And yes, I did try my hardest to find one of MacReady's giant hats, and they're just, a bit too much. And speaking of finding something, they actually find the spaceship that we saw at the beginning of the movie buried in the ice. Or where it should have been buried in the ice, but the Norwegians have apparently been spending a lot of time out here and have uncovered this. And from Norris's estimates, it seems like the ship has been here for around 100,000 years, just according to how deep it was in the ice. And the only thing that I'm wondering is, did they actually bury that much thermite and then blow up layer after layer after layer? Or was it already something shifted and then it sort of exposed itself and then they only had to blow up a little bit? That part, I'm not really clear about on how deep they had to go down to be able to find what they found. But one thing's for sure, they should have just left it there instead of actually trying to dig it up, because it didn't end well for them, and now it's not going to end well for all of our main crew. But while they haven't quite realized this yet, they have realized exactly what that block of ice was that Mac and Copper saw over at their base earlier, and they can see where they cut it out of the ice and actually found the thing. And this seems to be enough evidence for Mac for whenever they get back to base that he's now theorizing on what happened whenever the Norwegians dug up the block and the thing got out and basically killed all of them, or they kind of did it themselves. It just turned into a bunch of chaos, and he's trying to explain as well as theorize on what he thinks happened as well as what might happen to them. But most of the crew is in complete disbelief, and some of them are actually trying to come up with a more logical explanation for everything that they see and everything that's going on, but it's hard to get around the fact that there are literal pieces of an alien spaceship sitting on the pool table. And before they're able to question Mac any further,
"What are you disrespectful men been tossing his dirty drawers in the kitchen trash can?"
Now, of course, this may seem sort of odd at this point in time, but it'll come back up a few more times, and luckily, I don't have to explain it now because Mac will literally explain what I would explain later in the movie, so we'll get there. The only thing that I want you to notice from the dirty drawers that Knowles actually brings in is what Mac does with them. He grabs the trash can, he reaches over, and then he throws them in the trash can. That's all you need to notice about the clothes in this exact moment, because the other thing that I want you to pay attention to is who all is here, and currently every single crew member is in this rec room, and Knowles was the only one that was unaccounted for. Not everybody speaks during this scene, but Palmer has a few words to basically be like, yeah man, aliens.
I mean, they taught the Incas everything they know.
Childs is the one that is most outspoken against this whole idea of aliens and keeps questioning Mac and trying to figure out a different explanation, which Mac doesn't seem to be able to handle or even want to, because he literally just saw a spaceship and that's pretty crazy. So he redirects it over to Blair, who will hopefully have some answers, and this is what Blair has to say. Okay, so luckily Blair's explanation doesn't happen here because he still wants to figure out exactly what's going on, and that's what he does that evening whenever he goes back to his room, sits down at his computer, and uses it to simulate what the thing would actually be doing. I don't know why that was so hard for me to explain now. That seems to be fairly standard for what a computer can do. But back then, whenever they were making this movie, they thought that this scene was going to be a bit of a stretch for what a computer could do at the time.
When we previewed the movie, we got somebody on the card said that this kind of technology doesn't exist and wouldn't exist.
And even though we've come a really long way with computers, what Blair learns from his in this moment is really scary. And the results that Blair gets from the computer says the possibility of one or more of the crew members already being infected by the alien is 75%. And I gotta say, by the look on Blair's face, I'm pretty positive that he believes that it's already 100%. And the way that I've been counting it is that we definitely do have one with either Norris or Palmer, and then we also have maybe another one with Clark, and then there was the other part of an entity that got away in the attic. And if part of it were to get away and make it to civilization, the world's only going to have 27,000 hours before it's all infected by the thing, which is just over 3 years. And so Blair's response to this is not to grab the bottle of Smirnoff that's sitting on his desk, but instead it's to grab his gun out of his desk. And I guess you can count this as a Chekhov's gun because it is going to come back up here in just a little bit. Or is Chekhov's gun only if it ties into the very end? How exactly does that definition work? And after this, we cut to MacReady sitting in a room. I'm pretty positive that it's not his room because his room is actually detached from the rest of the base. This seems to be that it is actually in the base and maybe just like a spare little office that he's able to go in and kind of collect his thoughts and write some stuff down. The weird part is that he brought the trash can from the rec room in here with him so he can look at somebody's dirty underwear, which I just think is a funny picture to imagine MacReady getting up to leave the rec room after going back and forth with Childs for a little bit longer and actually taking the trash can with him, and then on his way out asking Bennings for his bottle of J&B back so that way he can finish it off. And even if they did put that in the movie, I'm sure Kurt Russell would find a way to make all of that look really cool because he is the coolest dude ever, even with as weird as this scene is of him looking at somebody else's dirty clothes that also seem to be ripped. Maybe it is more interesting than what I originally thought. I bring that up because it will come back around later. Once again, MacReady himself will actually explain it, so I don't have to. But he doesn't have time to right now because they're calling for him over the intercom to tell him to come get his stuff out of the storage room because that's where they're putting all of the stuff from the lab in there, including the thing. The weird half split face thing. So he throws the shirt in the trash, he picks up his bottle, he checks to make sure that it's all gone because he's already finished it off, and then he leaves to go to the storage room. I point that out specifically because it will come back up at the end of this video. But for now, we see Windows and Bennings actually bringing the weird monster split face thing, I'm just going to call it a thing, into the storage room to set it down along with everything else that they've already moved out from the lab. MacReady is already in there getting his stuff and ready to leave. And just as he goes to walk out of the room, we have Fuchs coming up to tell him that, hey man, we need to talk because I don't know who else I can trust. Stuff's fixing to get real weird and I need somebody to explain some of what I've found out about the thing to.
Please, Mac.
And as much as Mac doesn't want to go and do that, he decides to go with him anyway. And in the storage room, Windows makes the absolute best suggestion that anybody could make at this point.
We ought to just burn these things.
But for some reason, Bennings says we can't do that because this is the find of the century.
That's going to win somebody the Nobel Prize.
Which, I mean, probably, if y'all make it out of this situation. Did they not explain to you how bad it was over at the Norwegian base? Oh, we're Americans. Everything will be fine for us. But I guess if they're not going to burn it, they're at least going to lock it in the room. So, of course, Windows asks Bennings, hey, man, do you have the keys? So that way, well, we can keep this thing in here. And he tells him to go get the keys from Gary. And that's because Gary is, of course, the
station manager.
Thank you, Crow. And that's the reason that he has the keys because, well, he's sort of the guy to keep up with everything and try to manage everybody. So Windows goes to find Gary. Bennings stays behind because he needs to
Get some stuff out of here.
And I love this shot right here because I've missed it so many times and I pick up on it about half the time. But Windows almost picks up on it too. Because if he would have, it would have completely changed what is fixing to happen to Bennings. But while the weird split-face thing decides to liquefy itself into the floor in just a room alone with Bennings, we have Fuchs and Mac outside talking in private. And they're sitting in a vehicle. And Fuchs has been going through all of Blair's notes, and what Blair has found is that the cells are still active and alive in the burnt remains of both of the things. Which means that
They're not dead yet.
Then he continues on with Blair's thoughts by explaining that this thing has probably taken over millions of different life forms across all of space, and the only thing that it really needs is to be alone with somebody to take over their form.
It needs to be alone and in close proximity with the life form to be absorbed.
And Windows is fixing to see firsthand exactly what that looks like. Wait. What, did you hear that? Did you see the keys that were in his hand, right? He had the keys, he walked into the room, he turns, he sees Bennings being assimilated, and he dropped the keys and then ran outside to go find Max and Fuchs. Max? Mac. He dropped the keys. He dropped them on the floor. Just keep it in mind because we'll have to ask Gary about it here in just a moment. First, we all have to go outside to deal with Bennings, who broke out through the window and is now running like a crazy man through the snow. So they set off the alarm, they go running out there to find Bennings currently kneeling down in the snow, and pay attention during this entire time because you'll only end up seeing 10 of the 12 crew members out here. We're missing Clark, and we're also missing Blair for everything that happens. But nobody notices this right away because Bennings here. And well, that's not good, so Mac does the only thing that makes sense in this moment. So if you would allow me to get my thoughts out there and actually theorize a little bit on what in the world is going on here with Bennings, because I have some problems with what just occurred. And I have 3 different solutions to explain what in the world just happened. The first one is that the thing just didn't have enough time to fully assimilate Bennings, and he freaked out whenever Windows came in, causing him to jump up, run outside, sort of half-formed, and was just simply not smart enough to go and hide somewhere to continue assimilating Bennings, and then playing it off like, oh, Windows is just losing his mind. Which would have been a really interesting direction to go with what happens with Bennings, but we also do get this cool shot, so can't really be that mad. The second solution that I have to this whole thing is that the thing is extremely intelligent, and this is sort of a sacrificial pawn that is currently going on with Bennings to make them all think, well, thing's kind of an idiot. It could have ran away and hid for a little while, but instead it fell down right in the snow in front of all of us and allowed us to burn it on the spot, which would also give them a little bit of hope, thinking that they might actually be able to win this game that the thing is currently playing with them. And the third solution that I have to this is a little out there, so stay with me. Fuchs is going to propose an idea here in a little bit to MacReady, saying that he believes that only a small portion of the thing is all that is needed to fully assimilate somebody. This is where the slow assimilation process in theory comes from, that I will be bringing back up later. But for now, all that we need to know is that it is possible that Bennings has already started this slow assimilation process before this happens. Meaning that he was already partially assimilated, and now the split face thing is trying to fully assimilate him, causing there to be basically 2 entities inside of Bennings that are now trying to fight it out and also survive, because only one can win at this, which would lead to almost fully formed Bennings and the weird little hands of the thing trying to figure out what in the world to do now. And consequently, from both of them trying to survive, it led to both of their deaths through MacReady, setting them on fire.
cool stuff.
What I like about that is if that's in a different movie and you start the fire the other way, of course the can explodes.
So with all of that out of the way, and actually talking about fire, they do what Windows suggested earlier, and what they should have already done, but taking the rest of all of them out there and also burning them along with the rest of Bennings. And it's finally at this moment that they all look around and go,
"Where's Blair?"
And I guess Clark is just completely forgotten about again because they don't even mention him not being there. But it doesn't seem to matter too much because they still take their time and they actually bury all of the burnt remains in the snow, and Fuchs comes up to talk to Mac and he says,
I can't find Blair.
and from what I can tell, it seems like everybody is accounted for at this point except for Blair himself, who Mac actually thinks that he sees over at the helicopter.
Blair?
And I do want to point out what Carpenter said during the commentary here is not that it is Blair running away, is that we assume that this is Blair running away.
We don't know who that is, but it is supposedly Blair.
Then he also goes on to talk about how MacReady just randomly found this flashlight out of nowhere. Where did it come from? Who knows? Mystery flashlight? Sure.
We don't know why you find that flashlight.
But with it, he's able to see that the inside of the helicopter has been destroyed, and that's not good. But not only that is currently being destroyed, but back inside, Blair is going ballistic and destroying everything he can in the comm room.
Most of you don't know what's going on around here.
And I mean, other than hurting Windows, I don't really blame Blair for this because this is really the only way to ensure that the thing is not able to escape and make it over to the rest of the world. Because at that point, it's basically just going to be invasion of the body snatchers. And at this point is whenever Childs comes running down there with his fake hand, because Keith David actually broke his arm before they were filming all of this, and the best way they could cover it up was with this fake hand. And I'm going to point it out, and this is not the only fake hand to make it into the movie, and I will also point the other one out. But right now, all Childs is doing is pointing out the fact that Blair also went on to kill the rest of the dogs. And this causes Clark to be extremely concerned because that's his literal job, and I'm sure he would consider them his friends as well, so he gets up to go and check on the dogs. While he's doing that, everybody's coming up with a plan on how to take out Blair, and so Childs walks around to the side, and we get one of the best lines in the movie from Blair.
I'll kill you!
That gets me every time. And absolutely in this moment, he seems to mean it, but sadly, for him, he runs out of bullets. Which gives the whole crew just enough time to come running in to attack him with a table because he also has an axe. There's a little bit about all of this in the commentary talking about him sort of falling backwards so that way, you know, they don't get caught up with the table and the axe and everything.
A little scuffle here in a second that Will was very worried about. He was worried about getting hurt. You can see, here's what watch him as he backs up. There you go. He doesn't want to get hit too hard.
But there was a lot of stuff in this movie that used things that were dangerous. But they beat up on Blair. Everybody seems to have made it out with minimal injuries, and Fuchs falling back here also makes me laugh every single time because he's just like, oh, finally. But what's not a relief is what Clark finds over in the kennel. And the thing is, I don't know if there was only the one dog that jumped scared Clark earlier that was left, or if there was more dogs. Because Child specifically says,
Let's kill the rest of the dogs.
Which of course I don't want to just see a bunch of dead dogs laying around. That's not going to be cool. But it makes me wonder why Blair went and did this in the first place. And yes, I do have two answers for you. One is that Blair, whenever he took the blood sample and tested it, found something that shouldn't be there, which caused him to freak out and handle the dogs.
Most of you don't know what's going on around here.
The other is that Blair recognized that the only thing to get away last time from the Norwegians was a dog, and he wanted to make sure that that didn't happen again, and well, handles the situation accordingly. And it seems like instead of just jumping to conclusions and dealing with Blair in the moment, they actually waited until the next day. I'm sure they all got together in the rec room and tried to figure out what would be best for the next step. And I point this out because we will notice throughout the entirety of the film, there is a lot of passage of time where we just don't know what happens. But we can see that big decisions were made during that time. And one of those is to take Blair out to the tool shed and lock him inside. And not just lock him in there, but actually give him a sedative to keep him calm so that way I guess he can more slowly adjust to his new living situation. So as Copper leaves and everybody else is outside, we have Mac and Blair having a conversation, and I just love this entire course of dialogue because Blair's just like,
I don't know who to trust.
And it's interesting to me because he doesn't just say, Mac, I trust you, I don't know who else to trust. He says, I don't know who I can trust at this point. Any of you could be the thing.
Trust's a tough thing to come by these days.
And so Max says one of the other best lines in the movie at this point.
Tell you what, why don't you just trust in the Lord?
Which is the best advice that he can give, even though he did just take a drink of Blair's Smirnoff and leaves some of his, own spit and saliva and DNA on the bottle for Blair to then also take a drink of it later for them to then share some DNA. Do you see kind of where I'm going with this? We'll come back to it because Fuchs hasn't quite gotten to that understanding yet, and there's some important stuff that happens whenever Fuchs gets there.
Watch Clark.
What?
But for now, all we need to do is...
I said watch Clark.
Which I mean is good advice, and probably should have mentioned that earlier when literally nobody noticed that he wasn't there for the burning of Bennings.
So how do we know who's human?
But instead of them asking that question, Childs ask one of the biggest questions in the movie whenever Max steps outside.
If I was an imitation, a perfect imitation, how would you know if it was really me?
And this question is not just to the movie, but it goes for the commentary.
Ourselves, whether we would know whether we had been taken over, because it takes you over so perfectly.
And whenever they were filming this, they kept asking each other the same thing. So instead of playing any of their characters a little different if they thought that they were the thing, they just decided it would be best to play as they normally would, because would you really know?
This was the scene that got everybody talking throughout the whole movie. We never figured out. You could never figure this out.
Like, of course, if you are the thing, like, you would know that you're the thing, but to everybody else, you're just a perfect imitation, and so they wouldn't know. They wouldn't have any way to know. And so they asked Dr. Copper, is there a way that we could figure out who is who and what's going on?
Possibly. I've been thinking about a blood serum test.
And he comes up with the idea of testing their blood that they currently have in their bodies with the blood that is stored away in, I guess, like a blood fridge. If there is a technical name for whatever it is other than just fridge, please let me know. And Mac decides to let everybody else that's standing there know we need to watch Clark, because that's what Blair said, and Fuchs lets Mac know, well, we also need Blair because he knows the most about the thing. But then Mac's all like, nah, Blair's got to stay in there because that he's losing it. And he just tells him to get all of his notes and figure out as much information as he can and let him know, I guess. So I gotta ask, what do you think of Fuchs's performance in this? Because it turns out that Joel here, this is his first movie to ever be in.
His doom. Joel was very excited. This was his first movie ever.
I'll be honest, I think he's doing great. He might just be one of my favorite characters in the film. But it is kind of hard to pick whenever there is 12 characters to pick from in a movie, and we kind of have to juggle and keep up with most of them. So I do want to ask, like, are you starting to catch on with who everybody is and what their names are and kind of how they act? Because all of that is important for what happens next to figure out what in the world happened to the blood.
Somebody got to the blood. What?
Because clearly somebody came in here, unlocked the blood fridge, and then cut all of the bags, so now all of the blood's useless. Which means that the thing is still extremely smart to have picked out this plan even before they did, but now they have to figure out who did it, because Copper's the only one that would need in here, being the doctor, and then Gary is the only one with the keys. And everybody's suspicious of them, and then they also just decide to throw Clark in there because, well, he was around the dog thing, and that makes everybody nervous. And so, of course, they ask Gary, well, who would have had the keys?
Nobody. I just give it to Copper whenever he needs it.
And Child, starting to get a little hot here, points out that Gary's key ring never leaves him.
That key ring of yours is always hooked to your belt.
And while this is just causing everybody to escalate more and more, Windows is seen backing up towards the doorway before he bolts down the hall. Now, hold on, because why would he do this? I remember watching this, for the first couple times and being like, maybe he's just freaking out. He doesn't really know who to trust or what's going on, kind of like Blair, and so he just bolts down the hall to get a gun and try to get away from everybody. But the thing is that Gary gave Windows the keys earlier and is just not mentioning that to anybody. And so Windows is like, why would he not say that he gave me the keys? I was the last one that had the keys, and he's not even bringing it up, which leads Windows to the extreme of grabbing a gun and saying this.
You're gonna let him give the orders? I mean, he could be one of those things!
And I don't know if Gary's just trigger happy or what exactly is going on here, but he's already got him cornered, and this is his response whenever Windows says he might be one of those things.
I don't know about Copper. I give you my word, I did not go near that blood.
Not that he isn't one of those things, but that he didn't go near the blood, which I 100% agree with. I don't think he was the one to go down there to the blood, but we'll get there towards the end of exactly who it was and why. Because right now, we got to redirect just like what Gary does and says, I don't really think it's best for me to be leading this operation since people are going to be doubting me, and clearly I'm on edge. Somebody else take over. And he tries to pass it off to Norris, who, hey, if you remember, potentially infected.
I'm sorry, fellas, but I'm not up to it.
This is whenever Child steps up to try to take over and is stopped by Mac.
There should be somebody a little more even-tempered, Child.
Potentially infected. And Gary also sort of steps in the way to make sure that Childs can't get it, who is also potentially infected.
I'll take him.
Like hell you will.
And even Clark pulls out a knife to try to get in the way of Childs taking over, who is also potentially infected. Don't you start making those comments. I know what you're fixing to say. Whoa, a blood scene. We'll get there. So luckily, they're thinking ahead and they do the smart thing in this situation of going outside and burning the blood bags. Is that the smart decision in this situation? Like, that seems weird, right? Like, there's a little bit left over in each bag, and I guess if you like stab through all of them and then cut down, it would most likely cross-contaminate each individual bag to where they're not usable. But why are they burning the blood bags? Do they think that the thing could use them? Why would Mac decide to do this? All of this is coming to me right now, and I don't have an answer for you, but Mac at least can tell us this.
If you were all these things, then you just attack me right now. So some of you are still human.
And I mean, at this point, yeah, I could agree with him. Sounds good. The only person that's not currently here, of course, is Blair, who's still locked in the tool shed. And while they don't just lock him up, they decide that it would be best to go ahead and tie up Copper, Gary, and Clark just to be safe. Which is actually a smart decision, because that's what they need to continue doing, is playing it safe from here on out. And they even go as far as giving them all some morphine to basically keep them calm, so they're a lot easier to deal with, and hopefully only one person has to watch them, because they all need to go and prepare for the storm that is currently coming.
There's a storm hitting us in 6 hours. We're gonna find out who's who.
Which a storm and being locked down and basically quarantined inside is going to drive them all even more mad than what they already were. So after everybody gets ready for the storm and all hunker down, I'm assuming in their rooms, we have Mac over in the same room that we found him in before going down to get his stuff out of the storage room. And I've got to point it out because I can't keep up with where any of these rooms are in the base. I don't know where the rec room is in correlation to the kitchen, or how close it is to the lab, or how far away the storage room is. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense whenever they're just running down random halls that seem to continue going on, and this is all by design.
The main compound of U.S. Outpost 31. The interior is a cramped and never-ending maze of hallways, passageways, and doors which connect the many rooms and compartments within the compound. Sturdy but prefabricated materials have been used in its construction. There's a laboratory, an infirmary, a kitchen and mess hall, a communications room, and sleeping quarters. Other cubicles are used for storage and supplies. The most spacious area of the building, and the main center of activity, is the rec room. Through the many entranceways to this room can be seen the small work chambers with their sophisticated computers and other scientific equipment. The below quarter houses the generator and still other compartments for storage. A long underground tunnel connects the main compound to the dog kennel.
And so all I can really tell you is that this is the same room that he was in earlier, but this is not the same pair of clothes that he was looking at earlier. That's right, while Mac is making this recording of himself, he specifically says that it was Windows that brought this to him.
They could be anybody's.
Which could be why he was so much more on edge than what everybody else was just a moment ago. And this is actually whenever Mac mentions his theory about why the clothes are ripped.
I think it rips through your clothes when it takes you over.
And then continues right on after that and says, nobody trusts anybody now. And it's been a while since I've even seen a tape recorder, but it seems like he rewinds it and then records over the top of whenever he said,
nobody trusts anybody now.
I'm assuming to make it sound a little more official or something for whenever, hopefully, somebody will find this if everything goes wrong.
R.J. MacReady, helicopter pilot, U.S. Outpost North 31.
But hey, that's not the important part that happens during this scene. The important part is actually this shot. Doesn't really stand out. Kind of blends in. Seems to match as the rest of the mood. But for Carpenter to talk about this in such detail on the commentary should explain to you how different this scene can make the movie. Because both Russell and Carpenter admit that this shot from the hall makes it feel as though somebody is currently watching Mac.
There's the shot.
I love those two shots. You just felt like somebody was watching somehow.
And this is on purpose because during this part is whenever Carpenter specifically brings up that this is when he wanted to introduce the idea that Mac could be the thing. And he also admits that that was the direction he wanted to go.
For a long time, I was hoping maybe we could do something where you were.
Yes.
But then I thought, nah, maybe not. I'm not so sure they want to see that.
And that he really played around with the idea of seeing how it would play out with Mac becoming assimilated and becoming one of the things, as that being the big reveal for the end of the movie. But ultimately decided to opt for something a little more ambiguous with this scene.
So instead we made it ambiguous.
It's just enough for if you're not really paying attention, the movie continues on like there's not a big deal. But for those of us that do really love this movie and are watching closely, you see this scene and it doesn't take much to go, this would be the perfect time for Mac to get assimilated, if he wasn't already. But regardless of that, some undisclosed amount of time passes, and then we have Mac showing up to see how Fuchs is doing and all of his research by going through Blair's notes. And we get this cool split diopter shot whenever Fuchs begins to explain this theory.
If a small particle of this thing is enough to take over an entire organism.
And he finishes off his thought by saying that it's probably best for everybody to prepare their own meals and just go ahead and start eating out of only cans. And I just love Mac's response because he's just like, okay.
All right.
And this is the part that I've been referring to with Fuchs explaining this entire idea of the slow assimilation process, which I find most people seem to go along with the entire idea. And it definitely does make sense to me, because if the whole plan with what Blair found is for the thing to go out and take over the entire world within 27,000 hours, it's not going to be able to do that by just going to one person at a time, assimilating them, and then moving on to the next person. It's going to have to spread as much as possible and then take over the entire planet. Once again, a lot like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, the only real problem that I had with this entire thing is whenever Fuchs goes back to studying and the light dims down, apparently this means that there has been a few hours that have passed and now it is evening. Maybe you realize that and I'm just an idiot, who knows, but some time has passed and he's been sitting here for a little while. The generator dies down, he gets up, he goes to walk out of the room, and somebody runs by.
Who's that?
And just who was it? that runs by? I don't know, but Carpenter does. And in the commentary, he almost tells us who it is that ran by, but then he stops himself.
He's about to meet...
and decides to redirect the conversation to point out that this is actually Joel's first movie. And of course he has to redirect at this point because Fuchs is also finding MacReady's clothes in the snow. And then even the film redirects with some more time passing and Mac asking,
"Anybody see Fuchs?"
And while the answer's no, they all actually get up and decide that we need to go and start looking for him to figure out what in the world's going on, because most likely it's not good. And this is when Palmer makes it very clear to everybody that he doesn't want to go with Windows.
I ain't going with him. I'll go with Child.
Which makes sense on a few different levels, considering that the last guy that he was alone with did get assimilated by a thing and then they had to burn him, as well as him literally just freaking out and pulling a gun on everybody.
He could be one of those things!
But really, I think there's another reason that Palmer wants to avoid Windows at this point. Or instead of my secret reason that we'll talk about at the end, it could just be that him and Childs actually do hang out a little bit earlier in the movie anyway, and he just wants to be with a buddy of his. But Max straightens everybody out, and they all go to find Fuchs, except for Norris, who has to stay behind to watch the 3 suspected things. But the ones that we go with is Mac, Knowles, and Windows to go and check on Blair to see if he's seen Fuchs or heard anything. And of course, this is whenever we get some of the funniest lines in the movie, as Blair is just like, "I'm good.
I'd like to come back inside.
I should come back in now. I'm completely fine.
There's nothing wrong with me, and if there was, I'm all better now."
Ignore the noose that is there. Just let me come back in. I'm perfectly normal and sane.
I'm all right. I'm much better.
And won't hurt anybody.
You gotta let me come back inside.
And after hearing Hunter from Meat Canyon talk about this scene, I can't see it the same anymore.
He's like listening or like watching Big Mouth in the background. You like hear it in the TV. He's in the shed. He's like, "Let me back in. I'm normal. I'm fine."
And from what I found, the noose wasn't in the script or anything.
A little touch by Bill Lancaster.
Apparently Carpenter thought it was great too, and so they left it in. But all of this just leaves Mac looking at Blair like, "Yeah, I think you need to stay in here a little longer," and he shuts it on him. And this is when we find out that Fuchs has been killed sometime in the last few hours, and Knowles, Window, and Mac come walking up, and they're all like, "Is it him?" And the only thing that Mac does is reaches down, picks up his glasses, and says,
"Yeah."
I don't remember if he actually says anything, but I know that he's like,
"Yeah."
So then they're trying to theorize why this happened and how this happened.
Maybe he tried to burn it!
Or maybe Fuchs burned himself to prevent the thing from actually taking over him. Either way, they're not too sure exactly what happened and figured it'd be best just to go back inside and talk about it. And they start to head that way whenever Mac just tells Windows, "You go back inside, me and Knowles are gonna go out to my shack." And of course, Windows is like, "Why?"
Because when I left yesterday, I turned the lights off.
And there should just be a sound cue here to let everybody know something's fixing to go wrong. And good grief, going wrong is an understatement, because after about 45 minutes, neither of them had returned, and Childs has gotten worried enough that he's calling for everybody to start to barricade the rest of the base. And that includes Norris, who has been watching over the 3 captives up to this point. And if you watch closely, you can see that he has a slight face of pain whenever he's taking off the flamethrower. And the same pain will come back up in just a second whenever he's fixing to board up one of the windows. But we don't have any time to worry about that right now because somebody has made their way back to the base. And it's just one somebody, and I just love the way that this whole part is shot, because you're not sure who it is until they finally fall into the little entrance room here with everybody, and it turns out that it's actually Knowles. And he's got some bad news about Mac.
I cut him loose on the line up by the shack.
Because of course he found the same clothing that Fuchs did earlier, and that had him convinced so much that MacReady has to be a thing and this is his way to get Knowles out there to take him over, that he just cut him off and ran back. And while all of this is going on and everybody's sort of freaking out because they're like, "MacReady, there's no way," the door handle starts to move. Of course, they're just not going to let him in, so he has to find his own way in, and he is not happy. But what he is about half frozen and armed with dynamite at this point, threatening to blow all of them up.
Anyone messes with me and the whole camp goes.
And all he's got to do is move that flare over just a little bit, and they're all going to go sky high. And I thought it was so interesting on how much they talked about these flares and how awful they were to be around.
Remember those flares?
Those are real flares. I don't know about you, but I got my fingers burned more times on those things. And doing a very good job of not burning yourself with it.
Because Carpenter and Russell repeatedly kept talking about, with any scene that there was a flare in, they kept talking about the smells that were coming off of these flares and how they would just about choke you to death.
Burn your hand, burn your lungs. You breathe the stuff and it makes you want to give up and go home.
And then there was also the problem of sticking the flare right in the way of the camera, and then you couldn't see because then it would just blow out from the bright light on the camera.
Just dropped it down so it didn't flare the camera lens. What we all wanted you to do was get it close enough to your face still, and yet not too close.
But they were dedicated to using these flares, and I think it turned out awesome. But Childs, Palmer, and Windows here are worried that it's fixing to turn out terrible. So as they're stepping back, Mac is getting closer to him, trying to drive them back so he can at least get in there and get warm somewhere. And then he realizes, where are the other two?
Where's the rest?
And this is when Norris and Knowles, of course, jump on him, and he's able to fight them off and back himself up into a corner, and they're just like, dude, chill out. We just don't want to die right now. Seems to be too late for Norris because that pain he was having earlier seems to be a heart attack. And at this point, it's clear to everybody that Mac has the upper hand, so they just sort of let him take charge, and he demands for them to carry Norris down there and get everybody into one room so he can keep an eye on everybody at once. And they get Dr. Copper, untie him, so that way he can hopefully take care of Norris, but it seems to be too late. So before stuff really gets going, I do want to point out that it's interesting that Mac keeps threatening to just blow everybody up, even though both Fuchs and Blair have already pointed out that even after the thing or things have been burned,
there is still cellular activity in these burned remains.
So to me, it sounds like even if he did blow them up and they all turned out to be a thing, then it would just slow down the progress of the thing taking over the planet, since it would still be alive. And so this is him playing more to the human side of everybody that's still there, for anybody that is still human, because once they get blown up, they're not coming back.
So some of you are still human.
And if we're looking at it from the other side and Mac is a thing, it's also a smart move for him to do this because one, he's showing that he's not scared to get blown up, and two, it clearly worked for him to be able to gain control over the entire situation and every single person there. And I think the most confusing part of it all is whether he is a thing or he's not, his whole point right now is just to survive. And somehow, by him threatening to blow himself and everybody else up, this does lead to his survival. And this is all just one big chess game that has been going on, and this is just a big move. And in this game, it seems like one of these pieces is fixing to die, which of course is Norris sitting here, and Copper's doing everything that he can. He's calling for Windows to help him out. While they're doing that, you have Mac over in the corner just trying to get warm. Childs is calling him out on everything that just happened, and Clark is sneakily grabbing a scalpel for whenever he gets a chance, he's gonna try to take Mac out.
Quit that bickering over there!
So while they're squabbling over in the corner, Copper finally gets the defibrillator paddles and tries to help Norris out one last time by giving him a hand.
Clear!
Clear. Or two. And this is more than enough to get everybody else's attention, so they stop with their argument and turn to see that Norris is now, this thing, which of course we can just call the Norris thing. And Mac responds appropriately by setting it on fire. But the Norris thing is not going to go out that easy, because while one part of it is on fire, it decides, well, we'll just split into two, and then the head falls off the table and tries its hardest to get away. Interesting way to try to get away, but luckily the legs seem to work just a little bit better. And here's a question that I have for you. Do you think that MacReady could see Norris's head thing whenever he was standing over at the doorway?
We're on fire, MacReady! We're on fire!
Because from what I can tell, it's just like one table and the angle that he's pretty much at. He probably should have been able to see it. Maybe the fire was just really bright in his eyes and he couldn't notice it until Palmer actually pointed out and said something about it. And I'm just pointing it out because it does seem a little suspicious. But either way, even the head of Norris is not able to get away before Mac also sets it on fire. And just remember that Palmer was the one to point it out, because it'll be important here in a little bit that it was Palmer who pointed it out. But all the pointing that's being done right now is Mac pointing a gun directly at Childs.
Then I'll have to kill you, Childs.
Then kill me.
Because he has called everybody over into a different room where he could set up some sort of test with the blood, which is famously known as the blood test scene. And of course, him and Childs get into it again. And Clark thinks that this is a perfect time for him to step in and... Well, I'm sure that didn't go according to his plan, but luckily, this whole scene did go according to plan, or else this would have been a very different movie.
We're going to do this in one quickie. Bang.
That was tough.
Yeah, I was really worried about it, but it worked out.
Because as I'm sure you know, there has been accidents with people using blanks in guns for whenever they're doing scenes. And if you get too close to the end of a barrel, because it is all still really pressurized, people can still become unalived from a gun, even though there is a blank in there.
His comeuppance. We had to be real careful with this. When he charges you, you had to shoot him point blank.
Yep.
And Carpenter and Russell talked quite a bit about how everybody was so nervous during the scene because they just didn't want Richard Masur to get too close and then actually get shot for real.
So we used a quarter load, as I remember, but still, we were all really worried.
And it was a headshot, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
So everything worked out just fine for Richard Masur, but for his character Clark, not so much. And it's after they get Clark tied up over on the table next to Copper that it starts in on Carpenter's favorite scene of the entire movie.
We're gonna find out who's the thing.
And I'm throwing it out right now before we even get into it. The whole light in the eye thing, dumb. I don't even want to hear it in the comments. It's dumb. Carpenter never said it. He thinks it's also dumb. So, with that out of the way...
Here we are in my favorite scene, Kurt. This is the reason I wanted to make this movie, was the blood test scene.
Mac has a theory that if they were to harm a small part of somebody's body, their blood, that the thing would have no choice but to choose survival over getting burned.
Every little piece is an individual animal.
And would then react in a violent way.
It'll try and survive, crawl away from a hot needle, say.
And so then we see blood taken from Knowles and Windows and literally nobody else. So I don't know who they started with, but I can tell you one thing for sure. This does not clean a scalpel in any way, shape, or form. But we can come back to that later, because right now, Windows is the first to be tested. So according to Mac's theory, that means that he's not infected, and he arms him, because he needs some help to be able to keep everybody else under control.
Now I'll show you what I already know.
So the next two who are up for the test is Copper and Clark, and both of them also test negative. Now, Copper makes perfect sense. I don't see any reason or any point that he would have gotten infected during the film, but Clark, on the other hand, I had such an issue with this whole thing that I was literally calling it the Clark problem.
And Clark was human, huh?
Because Blair has been pointed out to be the smartest and most knowledgeable about the thing in the entire movie, and he's the one that continuously calls for them to watch Clark, which makes perfect sense.
Watch Clark.
What?
Because after all, he did spend all of that time alone with the dog thing, and by all means, he should have been the first person to be fully assimilated in the entire movie.
I said watch Clark.
But now he gets shot, nothing happens, and passes the blood test, which we'll come back to in a minute. But by all accounts, throughout the entire movie, Clark should have been one of the things. But since he's not, this means that Blair was wrong. So what I believe happened is that Blair underestimated the thing. which completely goes back to the chess analogy for this entire movie and how everything's been going up until this point, because the most obvious move for the Thing to make is to infect the guy that takes care of the dogs and spent all of this time with the dog thing early on in the movie. But instead of just doing the blatantly obvious thing, the Thing decides that it's going to find somebody else to infect, while everybody else will now be suspicious of the dog man.
What the hell are you looking at me like that for?
Clark. He's not a dog man, but Clark. The dog, he's the dog guy. He's the dead guy now, but which to me is the absolute smartest move that the Thing could have made, because everybody was suspicious of Clark, and nobody was suspicious of Norris, and nobody so far has been suspicious of Palmer either. And those are the two that, as we know, everybody should have been suspicious of. So now to return to the fact that Clark passed this blood test, because big surprise, I have a problem here. Because if you will remember, they brought the weird split face thing in, as well as the dog thing in, to have an autopsy after they found one in the snow and burned the other one. And hey, while Blair found out later on that they were both still alive, he was still able to cut them open and to literally take parts of them out without it reacting.
Seemed to be normal.
So somehow cutting the Thing open and literally taking it apart is not going to cause it to react until later, whenever it sees the perfect time, versus just a little bit of a burn on one little bitty section of it is going to cause it to freak out. I don't know, man. It just seems a bit far-fetched for me, but we also have to keep in mind that this theory is coming from the helicopter pilot, who just so happens to be the coolest Santa.
Let's get this party started.
Stupid. And I'm not the only one to question Mac's theory, because Childs, of course, has also got to chime in, even going as far as to say,
which makes you a murderer, don't it?
Then even Gary decides to chime in.
This is pure nonsense. Doesn't prove a thing.
To which Mac tells him, I'm going to test you last. And the problem is, up to this point, everybody has tested human until they get to Palmer. A little bit of a jump scare, but were you actually paying attention? Look at the hand.
That's phony baloney.
Yes, Carpenter pointed it out, so now I'm pointing it out to you, because I'll never be able to watch this movie again without just seeing the fake hand holding a Petri dish down in a corner.
That's a phony hand with our gag already set up, and I wanted to establish it in a cut early so that you wouldn't think about it.
Right.
But he did such a good job, because he knew he couldn't put in from a real hand to a fake hand, so the entire time that you see Mac from this angle holding a Petri dish, it's always going to be the fake hand, so you get used to it. So all of this works out great. There should be a whole theory about fake hands and who makes it to the end of the movie, I guess. And so as Palmer begins to transform before everybody, Mac is trying his hardest to get his flamethrower working, but it's just not doing it. He's trying to get it sparked up, and it's just not wanting to go. And Windows is just standing there in awe whenever... And luckily, before it's too late for anybody else, Mac finally gets his flamethrower going and just completely roast Palmer, or I guess the Palmer Thing, who then takes off, runs outside into the snow, and Mac is not just gonna let it go at that. He grabs a piece of dynamite and then throws it. I guess I should have said Kurt Russell grabs a piece of dynamite and then throws it at a fire, because this is not fake.
That woke me up in a hurry.
That's right, you heard me. This is a real stick of dynamite that Kurt Russell threw at the fire, who then had a piece of shrapnel come flying by him.
Whammo, man, it went right by me. I mean, I felt stuff go through me on that. I was just lucky.
And this next shot that you see of him is from a few days later, and I would have liked to seen his reaction the moment that all of this actually happened. But I guess it's already intense enough for what's going on, because whenever MacReady goes back inside, Windows is now also turning into a thing. And Mac's not going to let that happen, so he also sets him on fire. Poor Windows, man, he's had a rough go for this movie. Because now we've gone from a crew of 12 all the way down to 5, and 4 of them are currently standing in here.
Let's do it.
And they've still got to test Knowles and Gary, to which both of them pass, but that still leaves Blair, who they need to go and find. And so the plan that they come up with is for Childs to stay behind at the base while they go to find Blair and to see how he's doing in the tool shed. And I guess to give him the blood test as well. But Mac makes it very clear to Childs that
If he tries to make it back here and we're not with him, burn him.
problem is, whenever they make it to the tool shed, Blair's not in there anymore. And it seems like he actually escaped through the floorboards. But not only that, he's also been down there building his very own ship.
Something he's been making.
It's a ship of some kind.
And I will point out that I don't think Blair dug just all of these tunnels on his own. I'm pretty positive that the majority of them were already there because it's literally what the script says.
The below quarter houses the generator and still other compartments for storage.
Now, he may have had to dig just a little portion to get over to the tunnels.
A long underground tunnel connects the main compound to the dog kennel.
And the other thing I want to point out is just how smart the thing is. Again, it's been able to use Blair. Yes, obviously Blair is one of the things. If you've seen the movie, you know this. But it's able to use him to go around and get parts from tractors and the helicopter to build a literal ship that I don't think it would be able to fly off of the planet with these parts, but it would be able to leave the Antarctic and make it over to civilization.
Where was he trying to go?
Any place but here.
Which is what nobody wants to happen. But while they're still setting everything up, Knowles actually spots Childs leaving the base to run off into the snow.
I think I saw Childs outside the main entrance of the camp.
Or at least he believes that it's Childs anyway, taking off into the snow. So of course he points this out to Mac and Gary, and in this moment is whenever the power to the entire base dies. And this is whenever it sinks in for Mac that Blair is a thing, and what exactly his plan is.
He's got no way out of here. Just wants to go to sleep in the cold until the rescue team finds it.
Because, I mean, yeah, it's not going to be long for them to freeze to death. And so to avoid that, they decide to start burning everything down, starting off with blowing up the spaceship. Or I guess just ship because of what I said a second ago. But either way, that's the closest the ship's ever going to get to flying. And they don't just stop there. They go through and make Molotov cocktails. They grab some extra dynamite. They start blowing up and setting on fire absolutely everything in the base. And so this is what leads them down into the basement where all of the extra storage and the generator is, because if they can blow up everything underneath, that'll cause the rest of it to collapse, hopefully also burning and crushing whatever is left of the thing. And this is when we get another one of my favorite lines in the movie.
It's gone, MacReady.
It's so good! Because we have Gary walking over to where the generator is supposed to be, and he tells MacReady,
Generator's gone. Any way we can fix it?
And I'll be honest, for the longest time, I just thought that the Blair thing was using parts from the generator to make the ship, but unless they're running off of solar power and I just haven't seen the solar panels somewhere, the Blair thing turned off the power that was coming from the generator and then just took the generator somewhere. I don't know. I don't really care. I just think that the idea of Blair just sort of, turning into like the big form and taking the generator away is awesome. What's also awesome is Gary walking down here and trying to set up some of the charges whenever Blair just walks over and just sort of sticks his hand in his face. And what's even more awesome on top of that is this brief little bitty shot that we get of Blair just sort of dragging Gary by the assimilated face away. Where does he drag him to? Who knows? Same thing happens to Knowles, and who knows what happens there. MacReady definitely doesn't know, but what he does know is he's now alone. Or maybe not, but he is now without a detonator, and as a last-ditch effort, the only thing that he can do is throw some more dynamite. Oh, wait, did you see Blair's face on the one half of the... I just gotta point it out, think it's cool. And with that, everything explodes. The entire base, the thing, maybe MacReady, just everything goes up in flames, and it leads us into our ending, where we find MacReady stumbling around the base trying to find some shelter, and he finds this little half-burnt room and is able to sit down, where we can see in the time that has passed he's been able to find himself another overcoat. It could be a blanket. and another bottle of J&B. And as he sits down getting ready to take a drink and slowly drift off into the freezing cold, we can see somebody walking up behind him. And of course it's Childs, to which Mac just asks,
"Where were you, Childs?"
And then Childs begins to explain that he thought he saw Blair off in the snow and took off after him. And it's very clear that both of them are extremely suspicious of one another and not sure if they are a thing or not. But even with that, MacReady just tells Childs,
"If we've got any surprises for each other, I don't think we're in much shape to do anything about it."
So at least with a mutual understanding between the two, Childs just asks Mac, well, what should we do now?
Wait here for a little while. See what happens.
And with the last line of the movie, Mac also offers a last drink to Childs before they both freeze to death. And all we're left with is the iconic theme, a slight laugh, a burning bass, and credits. So after everything that happened, they're both clearly human, right? I mean, they both did pass the blood test after all, and we didn't see either of them actually get taken by the thing. And I mean, we did see Mac fight the Blair thing and win, and Childs never says that he fought or even found the Blair thing, so it's just down to paranoia between the two on whether or not they're both still human. Which does make sense for a horror movie to no longer have the threat be a monster, but just have it be paranoia and trust in general, causing both of them to feel the exact same way that Blair did earlier.
I don't know who to trust.
So by the end, we just find two men so completely broken by all of the events that have happened over the last couple days that they're now just willing to sit down and let the cold take them.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while?
But the problem with this entire line of thinking is this is what the thing would also want.
Whether we make it or not, we can't let the thing freeze again.
Right? Literally, Mac said this not too long ago, that this is going to be the thing's plan.
He's got no way out of here. Just wants to go to sleep in the cold until the rescue team finds it.
Because the thing has already been through all of this once, but last time it used a dog to be able to get away to travel over to another outpost, which then kicked off everything and people were suspicious of what the Norwegians had going on, and it just led to all of this chaos. But that's whenever the thing learned that somebody would most likely transport it for them over to a more civilized location. It's just going to take some time is all that it is. And well, for as old as it is, time is not really that much of a matter to it. So while the thing has learned from its mistakes, it's now going to wait for somebody else to make the same mistakes that the Norwegians did and Outpost 31 already has. So if that's not convincing, what I want you to do is put yourself in either one of their shoes, because we're assuming that both of them are human. So given everything that has happened over the last couple days, you know what the thing is, you know that its intentions are to make it to a more populated area, and you know that in this moment, the only thing that it needs to do to survive is just let everything freeze.
6 hours, it'll be 100 below in here.
Plus, you also know that everything around you is burnt and there's nowhere for you to go, so this is the end anyway.
Fire's got the temperature up all over the camp. Won't last long, though.
And so if there is a chance that you choosing to do nothing means that the thing wins, then the only correct option here is to do something. Because, I mean, picking between humanity as a whole and you and this other person that are both fixing to die anyway, I mean, humanity should win out.
And of course, I always thought that at the end, when we see that too, it'll remind me of it. So
Yes.
one of these guys was going to either have to make a move or torch each other if they were truly going to save the world.
Because you already don't know if there's another part somewhere else out there around the base that is currently also hunkering down ready to freeze. So the only logical thing for them to do in this moment is to sacrifice themselves by taking each other out, or just having Childs maybe burn Mac and then going and jumping in a fire with the actual thing on his back to where he'll also explode. I mean, yeah, it's awful, but at the same time, neither of them have to worry about being the thing or the thing surviving. Then it saves the human race.
We're not getting out of here alive, but neither's that thing.
I mean, Mac, Gary, and Knowles were already choosing death whenever they went to go blow up everything and burn it all down anyway, so why would you not continue down that road and just full on go for the fire.
Maybe we'll just warm things up a little around here.
Now, why that's the logical argument, I think the true argument for this film is that we missed a lot of time with all of the characters. Because if I'm remembering right, the only two characters that we see actually get assimilated is Bennings and Windows. All the rest of them happen off screen and are still very important. All of the off-screen moments are just as important as the on-screen moments. And it's not just me saying this, it's also Carpenter himself. Because in the commentary, whenever they make it up to the ending, they talk about how they went through different renditions and had all of these different ideas for what should have happened and what shouldn't have happened.
So they had me preview a scene where you cut right there.
And wasn't there some talk about bringing a helicopter comes in?
But what I found really interesting is whenever Kurt Russell says this.
The only thing we did know at this point was that MacReady was not, right?
And of course, Carpenter can't just give a simple yes or no. Instead, he says this.
He could have been.
Yeah, that's true, that's true. Here we go again.
Now, what I also think is interesting is clearly Kurt Russell believes that he was human. But so does Keith David. And this is because whenever they were shooting the movie, they all kept asking the same question that Childs did earlier.
If I was an imitation, a perfect imitation, how would you know if it was really me?
Which led to every single one of them just playing it as though they were human, because this is a perfect imitation of themselves anyway.
We had big discussions about whether you would know you were the thing.
Just didn't know. We said, do you know if you're the thing? Does it know if it knows that you know you're the thing?
Of course, while the thing would know that it's a thing, we would never know, and everybody around them would never know that they're a thing. Just like with Palmer, and just like with Norris. So that means that we're not going to have any, acting cues that tip us off to go, oh, that person's a thing. It's not going to happen. But what we do have is all this evidence of how the thing works and how intelligent this thing is. Along with its whole purpose being to spread and survive up until this point, for whenever they get to the end and have the big fight scene between the Blair thing and MacReady, for it to just attack all of a sudden instead of pulling back to where it will be able to survive a little longer, it's like at this point we've crossed from horror movie over to an action flick. And look, I get it, if they're both human, the entire movie is shifted from being about a monster to being about paranoia and a loss of trust that comes with trauma. But for what Carpenter has been leading up to and how he's been setting up the thing all the way to this point, this seems to be the biggest shift whenever it comes to explaining the ending. Which is why I think there is a better explanation for what happened at the end, and it seems like the majority of people agree with me. Because by far the most popular theory is that Childs is the thing. And to start this off, we need to go back to whenever we last saw Childs before the ending actually happened. And that's whenever he was standing inside, watching for the crew members to return as they were off to check for Blair. But of course, instead of staying in the base, he takes off running outside because he thought he saw Blair. Or at least that's how he has to play it off whenever he's explaining all of this to Mac.
Thought I saw Blair. I went out after him, got lost in the storm.
Because Mac and us know that Childs didn't catch up and burn Blair, because of course that's what Mac did. So the problem is, if Childs did catch up with Blair, according to the time frame, the way that Blair was acting later, it would make a lot more sense that he assimilated Childs before going down to take out Gary, Knowles, and Mac. But I'll be honest, the explanation that he gives to Mac makes a lot of sense to me, because up to this point, Childs has been made out to be this hot-tempered, quick-to-act, quick-to-move kind of character.
There should be somebody a little more even-tempered, Childs.
And even though that he's come around a little bit whenever it comes to his relationship with the rest of the crew after everything that they've been through, Mac already told him earlier.
If he tries to make it back here and we're not with him, burn him.
So for him to leave to go after Blair and not care what the rest of the crew thinks makes perfect sense to me for how he's been set up. And I will say it also makes perfect logical sense that when Childs is waiting by the door, he is currently human. And as a human, whenever he saw Blair run across, he takes off running after it, and that's when everything changes. Because if he gets up and close with Blair, that's it, he's no longer human. And I think that's where the difference really comes in for the Blair thing versus the rest of the things, because this time down in the tunnels, he's actually on the attack, trying his hardest to take out everybody that's down there. Probably because he knows that he already has established a backup in case things do go really wrong, just like they did. And the only way that I would say Childs is human at the end is because he didn't find Blair. The only problem with that is that Blair was actively seeking out everybody to assimilate and murder them. It's the whole reason he took out the generator, to draw them all into one place, and if one of them is currently chasing after him, it's easy pickings. And all of that is completely without considering the slow assimilation process. But before we go any farther down this rabbit hole, I do want to cover the 4 main things that I always hear people talk about whenever they're explaining why Childs is the thing. And number 1 has got to be the eye gleam theory. And I don't know what to tell you. It wasn't John Carpenter that came up with this. It was the cinematographer Dean Cundey. And no matter where you look, this is not applied to the final scene of the movie anyway. This was specifically only mentioned about for the blood scene, which still doesn't work because clearly you can see Palmer's eye gleam here. Well, what's up with that? And the next thing that I always hear brought up is that the thing doesn't have a need to breathe, and that's why we can't see Child's breath at the end. And from everything that I've seen and researched about this, it got debunked anyway whenever the new actual 4K Blu-ray editions came out because, well, you could see Child's breath at that point. It's just the fact that he's sitting in shadows and it's kind of hard to see it, but it's still there. Then, of course, there's the whole fact that we did see Bennings earlier get assimilated and then he runs off into the snow. And, I mean, what is this? Is this not breath? How do you explain it if it's not the thing breathing? Because it also doesn't make any sense, because if the whole idea is that the thing literally replicates every piece of you, it's also going to replicate your lungs and they're going to work the same way that they already do. And whether it actually needs to breathe or not doesn't really matter, because we do see Benning's breath and we see Child's breath. And so we can throw both of those out and move on to the rip clothes theory and the jackets in the hallway.
I think it rips through your clothes when it takes you over.
And basically it's that Childs is now wearing a different coat than what we saw him wearing whenever he was standing in the hallway, which could signify that he's been fully assimilated and all the little like tentacles and stuff came out and ripped all his clothes. That means he had to get a new jacket so that way he didn't look suspicious anymore. But just like the last one, with the enhanced version as well as a little bit of color correction to account for all of the dark hues and the flames that are coming across, it's the same style jacket as well as being the same color. And as for the jackets in the hallway, because they always get brought up simply because they changed from this scene to this scene, and as efficient as John Carpenter was when making this film, the amount of times during the commentary that he referenced that it was days later when they did the very next scene for this, or that they had to go back and do reshoots, or that this was even at a different location, it happened consistently throughout the film. So, I mean, it really wouldn't be that much of a stretch to say that this is just a continuity error because they had to shoot it on a different day.
Of course, that reaction was taken.
This is days later.
Because obviously Carpenter is amazing, but there's also a bunch of other people that have to work here, and not everybody's going to remember, hey, this exact jacket will look just like this whenever it was hanging the other day. But of course, that would be something that we would all pick up on. But I think an even easier explanation for this is the fact that Gary Knowles and Mac are now wearing different jackets whenever they leave. They probably just grabbed their jackets and had to move some stuff around. I don't know if you've ever been around a bunch of people when you're trying to find like your own jacket or anything, and everybody's got theirs hanging up, and you pick it up and you're like, well, this isn't mine. You throw it off to the side, you end up hanging it on a different coat. So yeah, either way, I still don't think this is a good explanation for whether Childs is actually the thing in the end. Now, an explanation that I used to think was actually really good until going into all of this research to make this incredibly long video was what happened whenever Mac gave Childs the bottle at the end. And I've actually heard 2 different ways that people explain this to confirm that Childs is the thing. First off is the one that you're probably thinking of, is that it wasn't actually alcohol in the bottle, instead that it was kerosene, because this is one of the leftover Molotovs. And for whatever reason, the idea is that the thing just wouldn't know the difference. Look at me. What? Have you not been paying attention?
And it imitates him perfectly.
Perfect replication of yourself.
If I was an imitation, a perfect imitation?
It not only has all of your memories, your mannerisms, and all of your organs, including the smallest bit of your anatomy, stuff like taste buds, it would 100% know. What I think would be even funnier to think about with this line of thinking is that it would take a drink and immediately go, this isn't Mac's famous J&B. That guy must be a thing, because Mac absolutely loves J&B, and this is not what that's supposed to taste like. Because clearly Mac was fixing to take a drink of the bottle right before Childs come walking in, and there's absolutely no way that you can tell me that this guy, who has been drinking for the entire movie, and that's all that he's wanted to do, now has some peace and quiet and can sit down and is just what? Not gonna drink his drink that he's always drinking?
I just want to get up to my shack and get drunk.
And this is not to mention the fact that Molotov cocktails are extremely flammable, and there's like a whole rag, and there was just a ginormous explosion and fire literally everywhere that should have taken the rest of them out. Plus, they were in a hurry anyway. It's not like they had a whole bunch of them laying around or a room that just spawned one in every couple seconds. No. I think a better explanation for why Childs would be the thing in the end because of the bottle specifically is because he knew not to share food or drinks like what Fuchs said.
And everyone should prepare their own meals. And I suggest we only eat out of cans.
Right? And that's just the thing. I honestly don't think Mac mentioned this to anybody else in the movie. And we'll get into why I think that about Mac here in a minute, but for everything that's happened up to this point, even if Childs did know, I don't think he would care. He's fixing to freeze to death. This is the end. The last person that he knows and the last person he's ever going to see is sitting right next to him and is like, hey man, here you go. And so he's just like, whatever. Now, even with all of those being mentioned, the idea of Childs being the thing in the end doesn't end here. Because we still have to consider the other side, and that's whether or not Childs was slowly assimilated and when it could have happened. And so buckle in, because we have to go all the way back to whenever the dog thing entered into the room with the silhouette on the wall. Now, obviously, we don't have an exact match because, of course, this is Dick Warlock who is standing in for either Norris or Palmer, and from everything that I found, multiple times over and over again, I kept finding stuff that would say, legend has it that Carpenter had David Cleenan sit in as Palmer for this scene, but the silhouette was way too recognizable, and so he switched him out for Dick Warlock to make it more ambiguous on who it was to not give the reveal away too soon. I just thought it was a fun little fact that I had found, and it doesn't make any difference to me because, one, I already had all of this written up beforehand, and two, I already knew who it was. And I have to say that I disagree with what most people think with it being Norris. And I feel like most people that go with Norris, it's just because the silhouette seems to match a little more because there's a collar that could be his turtleneck, but at the same time, Palmer also wears like his vest jacket thing for the majority of the movie, and I mean, it's also got a collar. But either way, it's literally not either of them, it's Dick Warlock. And I doubt he changed into what they were wearing. He was probably just wearing his normal stuff as a stuntman on set and went over and sat down. No, and there's a few reasons why I think this is Palmer and not Norris, and the biggest reason is because of Norris's heart attack. Because it just doesn't make any sense for him to have a heart attack whenever he's been the thing for this long. And I know what you're thinking, but you already said that this is supposed to be a perfect imitation of what you were before, so that would include any flaws, right? He doesn't need a heart. We literally see his chest open up and his head detach. The head doesn't have another heart. The thing doesn't need a heart. And obviously it's not like the heart attack helped the thing in any way at all. It actually messed up its entire plan. There's clearly going to be an issue with me attempting to explain why the thing would have a heart attack whenever it actually doesn't need a heart and can survive in two separate pieces one of those being a giant mouth with teeth. I doubt there was a heart in there at that point anyway. And then the head, of course, there's not a heart up there. And so it just doesn't make any sense for this to happen unless Norris was assimilated the slow way. Now, just hear me out for a second. If Norris was assimilated the slow way, then his body's being taken over cell by cell. And of course, if he had a weak heart, and then next thing you know, it's being attacked and slowly taken over, then the heart would probably act up and start giving him chest pains to the point that it actually gave up and just full on had a heart attack as sort of a one last chance of let us attempt to fight whatever in the world is going on right now. Which means that Norris's body would have been almost fully taken over by the point of the heart attack, and then after the heart attack, there would have been nothing fighting back against the thing with the replication of cells or anything, and it would have been able to go on to do this.
Clear!
Without a heart. And I gotta say, to me, this explanation makes so much more sense whenever you're trying to wrap your head around, well, why would the thing be dumb enough to give itself up because it knew that it was in pain? You can't say the thing doesn't know what pain is because it's literally been burned multiple times up to this point, as well as being frozen to death and who knows what else it's been through. Because remember, the thing is experienced in all of this as well as being very smart. And that's why I think that it chose Palmer instead of anybody else to start out with the full assimilation with the dog thing. Because remember, the dog thing spent that entire first day that it was there walking around and checking everybody out. And it would have been able to identify who were the hard workers between Copper and Mac leaving to go to the Norwegian camp, as well as the other ones that were actually talking and trying to figure out what in the world's going on. But then you've got Palmer, who's the laid-back stoner of the group that also has slight 60s acid damage. Who's the laid-back stoner of the group that also has, so I might put in there where Crow actually says, slight 60s acid damage. I mean, throughout most of the film, even whenever Palmer is speaking, everybody's just sort of like, what are you talking about?
Happens all the time, man.
Probably what y'all have been doing with me this entire time.
Government knows all about it, right, Mac?
Either that, or he's coasting off of what everybody else says, just being the kind of yes man in the background, or he's also actively trying to stir stuff up, like whenever he said,
I ain't going with it. I'll go with Child.
Palmer's not given much credit or attention for the majority of the film, and I think that's exactly what the thing would want. To be able to sit back and observe the entire crew so that way it can then make its next best move. Because once again, the thing is that smart to be able to do this in the first place. So the reason that I actually bring all of this up is because of this scene with Palmer and Childs. This here would have been the perfect moment for the thing to start a slow assimilation process to see how it goes and works with this crew. Which would mean whenever Childs abandoned his post and ran off after Blair, this is just him trying to get away so that way he can ensure his own survival. Which is exactly what the thing's plan would be, is to get away and just survive. And it's not just me saying that, but it's also Russell and Carpenter. Because at the very end of the commentary, they bring up this idea that basically from the thing landing on our planet, it's just doing exactly what we would do if we landed on another planet and went through just trying our hardest to survive.
And yeah, we're beginning to understand too that that thing just wants to survive. And it's an organism, it's just like us. We could go to another planet and eat plants, and from the plant's point of view,
That's
we're
right.
this horrendous looking monster.
And even in the end, the absolute best plan for the Child's thing to be able to survive another day is to not provoke Mac. Because all they have to do is sit there and freeze, and the thing wins. And it's just a bonus if Mac wants to share a drink, because this means that it could also infect him while it's at it to guarantee its survival even more so. And then it's just a matter of waiting for the next group of people to come through to take them to hopefully a more populated area, so that way this thing could actually take over the planet. And again, this whole slow assimilation idea is not just based off of my thoughts, but it's based off of what Fuchs found through his own and Blair's studies of the Thing.
You come up with anything yet?
A small particle of this thing is enough to take over an entire organism.
And if MacReady is the Thing, this is why he would have to kill Fuchs, because this information would be so important to the Thing's plans that it would not be able to let this information reach any of the crew. Because then they would realize that the situation is not just about them at that point, but the entire planet. Now, the whole reason that I bring this up is because in 1982, there were about 4.6 billion people on Earth. And if the slow assimilation isn't real, then the Thing would have to assimilate 170,370 people an hour to be able to hit the 27,000 hour mark that Blair's computer spit out earlier. And this is not to mention the fact that the amount of people that would be calling in to literally everybody to say, hey, my friend just got attacked and is now being wrapped up in these weird tentacle things by some sort of alien monster. Can you please come do something about it? Oh no, it's me, now I'm getting attacked. There would end up being a full-on war against the Thing in no time, unless it went through and spread a different way to where it wouldn't be really noticed and it would be able to infect a bunch of people all at once. And then next thing you know, it's taken over the entire planet and now we're all also the Thing. I don't even know why I'm arguing this point right now. This is just what's in the movie. We should all agree on this entire point and what happened. It just makes sense. It's the most logical thing. It's what they were trying to give us with the limited information that is in the film. So with all of that, we are currently moving on to why Mac would be the Thing and exactly how he could have been assimilated early on in the film. And I'll explain this the same way that I did with Childs, because there are multiple points throughout the movie that Mac could have been assimilated, both the full way and the slow way.
When do you think it got to him?
I don't know. Could have been any time.
And so we're just going to take them one at a time, walk all the way through them, then go on to the next one, because I don't know how else that it would make sense. So prepare yourself, because we do spend the most amount of time with him, and there's just going to be a lot of explaining. So to start, we have to go back to the trip that Mac took with two confirmed things, Norris and Palmer, out to go and see where the Norwegians were actually digging up all of this stuff. This is when we get to see the alien spaceship. Now, as I've already stated, I do believe Palmer is a thing whenever they take this trip, but I don't believe that Norris has been fully assimilated yet. And if for whatever reason you do think that both of them could have been fully assimilated at this point, I don't think anything actually happened here, because for the big game of chess that's currently going on, this would have been a perfect move to have Norris and Palmer basically cleared in the eyes of Mac. Which obviously worked, because neither of them are suspected of being a thing up until the reveal. Yeah, I know Palmer was tied up for the whole blood test thing, just like everybody else, but everybody else had something to say, and Palmer was just, once more, in the background doing his own thing, and the next thing you know, hey, it's me! And the only reason I even mention it is because I've heard other people bring it up, and so with that out of the way, we can go to the weird room that Mac likes to sit in every now and then in the base. Because as I stated earlier, this is the moment that Carpenter himself said that he wanted to go full in on the idea of Mac being assimilated by the Thing. But just because we don't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Because out of all the moments that Mac could have been assimilated, this one just makes the most sense for everything that happens right after this scene. With the whole thing with Fuchs, the whole thing with Knowles, everybody being suspicious of him, all the way up until the end, it would make sense that if they just added a shadow on the wall, the entire understanding of the end would completely shift to everybody saying, well, clearly Mac is the Thing. But the problem is the blood test scene, right? I mean, he passed, didn't he?
Now I'll show you what I already know.
And it's all because this blood test scene is filmed so perfectly that we have just enough information. Because what we see MacReady do is just heat up a hot copper wire and then put it in a petri dish with his blood in it. Because, I mean, I don't see a cut anywhere on his thumb like they did with Knowles and Windows. And, I mean, would it really be so hard for Mr. Man over here holding everybody at flamethrower point to switch all of these around Because, I mean, there are a lot of Petri dishes up there, and I'm also assuming that he was the one to write everybody's name on there, and it wouldn't take much for him to go through doing this with the flamethrower to move them around, and next thing you know, his name is on somebody else's blood. Now hold on before you post that comment that you're currently typing out about how wrong I am about this whole blood scene thing, because I do have a better explanation for what happened. Because it goes back to the same thing that keeps coming up over and over, that this is supposed to be a perfect imitation of you, all your organs, including all of your blood.
He'll try and survive, crawl away from a hot needle, say.
So with that in mind, Mac's theory does sound a little goofy, but here's what he actually says.
The blood from one of you things won't obey when it's attacked.
So what if the Mac thing is right about the other things? Because up to this point, the things have only gotten better at replicating humans. Starting with the split face thing that clearly had some issues whenever replicating a human, as well as whenever it latched on to Bennings, it still had issues in doing a good job of replicating a human. Going all the way up to Norris, who was almost perfect, but clearly his body was still fighting back, which clearly led to it being revealed, and if that hadn't happened, we probably never would have known that Norris was a thing. But there were flaws in the assimilation process that caused it to fail. And I actually think this is the whole reason why the Palmer thing pointed out Norris's head whenever it was trying to get away, basically saying, I'm a better version of you, and only the better version needs to survive and move on. Which then leads us up to the blood test scene where the Mac thing does the exact same thing and calls out all the other things that might still be around, saying, you're good imitation, but you're not perfect like me, which means that he could use his own blood and not actually have it react because it still obeys him, being a perfect imitation. And continuing on from here, it would make a lot of sense as to why the Blair thing didn't actually attack Mac down in the tunnels. Instead, all it did was take away the detonator and then scream at him. To which, as we all know, he responds and then tosses a stick of dynamite. And I do like the thought that Mac just understood what the Blair thing was saying in like a different alien language and was actually responding to his angry questions on why they're fighting since they're on the same team. And with them being on the same team, that would make more sense as to how in the world MacReady was able to survive this giant explosion. Because as we all know, even if the things are burnt, there's
still cellular activity in these burned remains. They're not dead yet.
And then that would actually lead us into the next moment that Mac could have been assimilated. Because this is the part where Carpenter himself pointed out to Russell he could have been because...
I mean, he was just... We didn't see him for a while.
And I mean, yeah, maybe. There could have been like another thing out there running around, like the part of the dog that separated up into the attic and ran off. It could have like ran over and got on him since he would have been, you know, probably out of it from the giant explosion that just happened and would have just been laying there ready to be assimilated. And now he would be assimilated, goes and finds him a new blanket and a bottle of J&B to sit down and wait for the cold. And speaking of the dog thing that separated off into the attic, I've seen where a lot of people are torn on whether or not it did separate or not. I don't think it really changes the movie if it did or if it didn't. I will admit it would make sense that it didn't because literally nobody reacts or ever brings it up again. So if you already made a comment about it, go ahead and leave it. You can just go back down there and put a timestamp to this moment. Thank you. And so with all of those being covered, those are just the moments that he would have been fully assimilated by the thing. We still have to cover a slow assimilation, which I did mention throughout the walkthrough, the different parts of where people are drinking from other people's drinks. And how Mac's bottle of J&B that he gives to Bennings in the beginning, after Bennings has now been licked all over by the dog thing, and then later gives back to Mac, it could have been as simple as that for getting him slowly assimilated. And going from that moment over to when Fuchs realizes this is a way of assimilation, and Mac has to take him out since he knows about it firsthand. And if not, it probably wouldn't have taken long for Fuchs to realize that Blair has also been affected the same way. And potentially, depending on how much of Blair was left at this point, they would then be able to figure out that it was Mac through drinking from Blair's Smirnoff on that first day that he was locked up in the tool shed. which then would have just blown the lid off of the Thing's plan and everything would have completely changed and shifted from there. But the Thing's too smart to just let that happen, and it dealt with it before it was a problem. So all of it would have started with the dog licking on Bennings, to then Bennings drinking on the bottle of J&B, to then Mac drinking on the bottle of J&B, to then Mac drinking on the bottle of Blair's Smirnoff, to then Blair drinking on the Smirnoff, to then Blair taking out the rest of the crew. A bunch of consecutive moves, all within a big broken game of chess that was doomed from the start all the way up until the final moments of when the Mac Thing is ready to hunker down in the snow and wait to be found for a third time. And the third time most likely will be the charm in this case. Only problem is, here comes Childs with a flamethrower in hand.
Did you kill it?
And luckily, by being quick on questions and answers, Mac is able to cast doubt on Childs by asking,
"Where were you, Childs?"
And after Child's explanation and question of how will we make it, he answers,
"Maybe we should."
Childs takes this as Mac calling him out and begins to explain as to why he's not, but Mac cuts him off again with,
"If we've got any surprises for each other, I don't think we're in much shape to do anything about it."
All of it keeping both of them just suspicious enough that they're gonna wait for the other one to make a move first. But instead, the move that Mac makes is seen as a kind gesture among humans. One that Childs wouldn't have any idea would change him from human into something else. All because he thought MacReady was just being nice in the end and sharing his drink with him. So now we're just left with the thought, what if they were both the Thing? And with everything that I've said up to this point and explained for all of the sides, I think this one makes the most sense. With Blair being infected and hunting down Childs to ensure its survival so that way it can go all out in the end, just for the Childs Thing to then be sitting across from the Mac Thing in the end, sharing a drink. Which would be pretty funny because they're probably both thinking maybe I can infect the other one. Oddly enough, still having paranoia set in even though both of them are things. Causing the shift in this broken game of chess from being about a creature infecting humanity to humanity infecting these creatures. Now, while I think that is a near perfect note to end all of this on, the truth is all of them are correct and they can all be argued.
You know, you can't really order up a happy ending when you're dealing with something like this.
Now, while I clearly do lean on both of them being the Things as the best answer for what happened, which also makes it the most horrific for the fate of humanity, I believe that this was just Carpenter's intent whenever he was making the film. But that's not what we got. Due to changes from the studio and this being a team effort, when even Carpenter admitting that Russell was the one that came up with the idea for this ending.
He also came up with the final line for the movie, too.
Well,
on location.
We talked about it forever and ever, didn't we? We just...
How are we going to end this thing?
How are we going to end this story?
It's clear that the ending that we actually got was crafted in such a perfect way that all of these answers could be true.
I thought your ending line, I thought this entire ending of the movie was incredible. It would be what I would want.
And that the horror of it all comes from us questioning the end just as much as our last two characters.
I remember dealing in my mind with the fact that, is MacReady a creature or not?
Right.
I still can't decide whether Childs was a creature or not.
I know. I thought that was...
I cannot decide.
There was no way of telling and no way of ever knowing.
But unless we get a direct sequel from Carpenter himself, I'm standing on this hill of they were both the Thing in the end. I don't believe it. I do not believe that I made it this far. Even just in recording and making this video. If you're seeing this, I mean, that's awesome. This has got to be not only my longest video that I've ever done, this is the biggest project I've ever done. I think this is even the longest breakdown of the Thing that I could find. If there's a longer one, just please let me know. It's so hot. It took me a total of 5 days to go through and record this whole thing. And it's so hot. My AC's messed up. And if you're actually seeing this, I hope you enjoyed me changing and constantly, you didn't get to see me wiping the sweat off of my forehead for the video. And I'm sure there's still some details that I missed along the way. There's so much that happens on screen and off screen in this movie, and whatever little details that I might have left out or cool facts that you know, please drop them down in the comments for all of us to read them. And thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this video. Be sure to go and check them out with all of my links down in the description. Also, thanks to Crowmudgeon for lending his voice to this massive project. Be sure to go check out his channel for more amazing horror content, and just because he's a great guy and a friend of the channel. You can even go over there and watch a video that I'm in with a bunch of other creators, and I honestly don't believe that it's even real that I got invited to be in a video with all of these people. It's awesome. Thanks again, Crow. And a big thanks to all of the channel members. You guys directly support me so I can make stuff like this, and that whole thing is just still wild to me, so thank you. And of course, thanks to you. It really does mean a ton that you stuck around for this entire thing. And if you need more from me, here's another video that you can watch on this channel. Here's a video you can watch on the second channel. You can also join the Discord and stay up to date on everything that I have going on, as well as just probably some personal stuff that's going on in my own life. And with all of that being said, I thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an extra blessed day, and I'll see you in the next one.